everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. There was a report released yesterday from the Pentagon. They were instructed to review the problems of what happened back in October in the Battle of Kunduz, and it was chaotic because in the news back then was the big issue was our bombing a hospital, and it wasn't one single bomb, but several bombs. It was chaotic. A lot of innocent people killed, doctors were killed, and of course what really came of it was we were very much involved in a battle. So they asked for a report. We got the report. Most of it, or a good bit of it, redacted. So we don't know what's in between the lines, but we do have a little bit more information. And I guess the best word that we could use about describing what went on this battle between the United States along with Afghan forces and the Taliban is confusion, total confusion. When I was reading the description that went on, it made me think of the total confusion that was in Black Hawk Down in Mogadishu. And that probably was minor. This one was a much bigger one. This was a military operation. And of course, there's a lot of confusion because theoretically and politically, we're not supposed to be involved. We just trained people to kill other people, but we weren't involved. So there's a lot of dissection to do on this to try to figure out what's going on, but obviously a plan to leave Afghanistan doesn't look like it's in the cards. I was looking around, even those who lean toward a little less intervention overseas with the presidential candidates, both the ones that are still in and others, and there was nobody calling for anything even close, to getting out. I mean, even Sanders was a little bit disappointing, although he was probably the best on this. But it looks like we're going to be there. It looks like we're not going to surrender. And it looks like with the troops there, they'll always have to be defended. And it looks like there'll be escalation.
What was a real surprise, apparently, to the military, and this came out in the report too, was first of all the Taliban offensive in Kunduz in October was very surprising because it was extraordinarily well coordinated. The U.S. wasn't expecting them to have such a good strategy. They had plenty of reserves, plenty of backup, and the victory in Kunduz was significant because it was the first time that a real city was retaken by the Taliban since 2001. Right. So that had certainly a strategic component, but I think also probably more important, it had a PR component. Here's the U.S. 15 years and how many hundreds of billions of dollars later, and the city falls to the Taliban. So, and I think this is one of the reasons why the U.S. felt such pressure to retake it. Although the U.S. troops that were there with the Afghans did not have a rules of engagement that allowed them to directly engage the so-called enemy. And so this gets back to the report, which found that the Afghan military wasn't all that enthused about taking back Kunduz. As a matter of fact, you mentioned it earlier, they said, if you guys let us do this fighting alone, we're leaving, we're out of here. So the special forces were forced to stay and engage in this fight, and that's supposedly in the fog of war how this hospital was bombed.
You know, these problems just don't pop out of nowhere. I mean, the situation has to be established over a period of time, and we really can go back with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and then our so-called alliance with the Taliban and the introduction of the teaching of the radical Islamists in Saudi Arabia because we were fighting communism and it was justified as a just cause. And so we, in many ways, were very much involved on the side of the Taliban. And yet, that was what back in the 1980s, I guess it wasn't. And here, it keeps morphing into something else. It never ends. And then the major war, and then we say, well, we're going to end. Matter of fact, even Obama says the military operation have ended, although everybody's committed to keeping somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 troops there. Well, what are they doing there if the military operation hasn't ended? But this whole thing of, well, this is different. This is the thing that bugs me at times is, Well, this is different. We're not really fighting a war. We don't declare war, and what we're going to do is just train our friends, like we work with the Taliban. So we're going to train our friends to fight the Taliban now, and so that'll cost a little money, and but we won't get involved. But I think this incident proves that they don't always level with us. I mean, whether it's our troops not just training, whether it's the special forces involved, whether it's our CIA involved, I think it's a perfect setup for presenting to those individuals who don't like us the moral high ground, because they can get the support of the local folks. And support of the local folks is the only way you can maintain a country. And so the support, they say that, well, these are invaders. These are invaders, just like how we would respond if anybody would do that to us. So I think the whole thing makes no sense whatsoever. You would wonder why our leaders do this. And if you go, I bet if you go out and talk to 1,000 Americans just off the street, how worried are you about the Taliban in Afghanistan? And could you show us on the map where Kunduz is? You know, it won't happen. Do you think you ought to spend more money and jeopardize our economy even more? Nobody will support that. And yet, the political leaders, it seems, I just really get impressed with this deep state, you know, the shadow government. Why does it seem to happen, no matter who's involved, that there is some control, and there's always high hopes that the candidate would come along? I remember when Reagan was running, he was going to be the one, and yet it ended up, you know, not a whole lot different, whether it was budgets or foreign policy or anything else.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You asked me earlier, we were talking about a title and the word escalation. You said, is that really an accurate assessment of what's happening? And I argue that it is, and here's why I think it is, because in light of this report, which says the military is confused, they don't know what the rules of engagement are, the facts on the ground are very different than the policies coming out of the Pentagon in Washington. So in the light of this report, the military leaders are now preparing new recommendations for U.S. actions in Afghanistan. And if you combine that with, and we closely were looking at the mainstream media reporting on this report, and I think it's absolutely true that the theme of the mainstream reporting is this is a disaster in Afghanistan, and it's a disaster because our military's hands are tied. So put two and two together, and I think you're going to have a changing rules of engagement, which will allow the Americans to become much more actively involved. And no matter how you slice it, I would call that an escalation.
Yeah, and also, you know, the policy's bad. It leads to all kinds of unintended consequences and death. But what about the corruption, too? It exists over here, too. We send money, we buy things. And what about all the corruption, probably more even in Iraq, you know, the way they would buy and sell weapons and lose billions of dollars of currency itself. So it leads to corruption. And nobody seems, well, they pretend they care, but they don't do anything. We keep sending more money. So I don't know how we can ever deal with this unless people realize that the policy is bad.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention the corruption, actually, because, you know, it was kind of a joke last week when it came out that the Afghan military, after we've spent $68 billion outfitting them, they don't have any boots. You know, they're without boots, so they can't fight. Obama, in response, has pledged $215 million to buy them some boots. But what's turned out is that the U.S. sent thousands of size 12 boots to Afghanistan, and Afghan men rarely have larger than size 10 feet. So totally useless. Plus, what they're doing is they're getting top dollar to buy the boots, and then they're going to some knockoff places in China and getting some junky boots. These guys, they say that they're broken before they even come out of the box, and you can bet that someone is putting the rest in their pockets.
So what you're saying is the military-industrial complex is a little bit more complex than selling guns and bombs and airplanes. It's selling boots and buying them from China. Oh my, what a horror.
Well, here's another good one. We just put up an article from our friend Peter Van Buren today, and he reports that the U.S., between the DOD, the State Department, and the USAID, we've spent $759 million on educating Afghan children. However, the U.S. has no idea what happened to the money, where it went, if it actually educated anyone or anything. They just simply keep no records.
You know, when we have commissions, I have no confidence in any government commission because I believe they're always designed to cover up. and they will throw out tidbits. So if we're looking for truth, we probably don't get it. But even with this report, we sort of cling to a few things that are probably true, or at least leading to it. But there must be some tremendous things that they omit. There's usually, you know, when our government gets into problems and do bad things, there's usually no punishment. You know, sometimes if they're FBI agents and others, sometimes they get promoted after they do some very vicious things. I don't know whether that happens in the military, but obviously we don't end up getting the truth, no matter what commission it is. I think that's why nobody believes them anymore, and this is a healthy thing that, but it takes so long. Look how long it took the people to realize that, you know, maybe there's some questions about the Kennedy Commission, you know, the Assassination Committee, and all these things, 9/11 commissions, and these smaller commissions too. There must be something that we should know about that they didn't tell us about.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, neither of us are military strategists, but all you have to do is have a little common sense to realize how foolish the strategy is. Just for example, here's a contradiction. President Obama has proposed $900 million to be sent over to Pakistan to help the Pakistani military. Although at the very same time, we know it's indisputably proven that the Pakistani government has been helping the Taliban in Afghanistan. So we're fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan while we're helping the Pakistani government, which helps the Taliban. It reminds you of in Syria, where we're fighting ISIS and we're fighting the enemy of ISIS.
And we wonder, we have to work hard to try to keep these factions straight. We try to inform the American people to keep things straight, and yet I don't think our government even knows what they're doing, and it gets out of control, always well-intended, and there might be some basic goals that they have which they'll never tell us about. But I still think one of the biggest problems is that it's hard to get the truth. You know, I've made the statement that truth is treason in an empire of lies, because they don't want us to know what the empire is all about and the financial institutions, so they have to lie to us. And one of the most vicious lies that is punished ultimately, you know, in this country, is if an individual even tells a white lie against the government, you know, to the government. That is one of the most wicked things that you could do. But governments notoriously lie all the time. And just think about how we pretend that we're looking for the truth. We say, well, we'll pass this whistleblower law. If we have a whistleblower law, people will come forth from the inside and tell us the truth. So we do have an Edward Snowden come forth revealing what's really going on, and he's a criminal. People think he should be executed, and yet it was a fantastic revelation of what's going on. So it's so often for me it boils down to, how do you seek the truth? How do you find the truth? Can you depend on the government to give us the truth? And I think they're incapable of it, because I think power is so destructive, and they have to maintain their power, and they'll do anything. Even statistics in economics. You know, when I look at them and read about them, I figure, you know, what kind of fudging are they doing here? Is the inflation rate really 1.5%? Or could the inflation rate be 4.5%? And like I said, though, I think the healthy trend is a growing number of people, and that's why this election is so chaotic, is that they distrust the government. But I don't think the people have been able to grasp quite, you know, what is the solution to this? Is it more of the same? You know, and I've been burned so often by hoping somebody would get in there and do something differently, but I've unfortunately have come to the conclusion that those people who would lead me to be more loyal to the Republican Party, I mean, the Republicans and Democrats have not demonstrated that there's much difference. And the deep state, that secret government, the controls, the financial controls, seem to move in. And if you get anywhere close to the presidency, it seems like they have a hammer and a wedge and say, you will do this, you will obey, and this is it. And those individuals then have to go and become, I think of Reagan's appointment for vice president. You know, I think Reagan was pretty independent-minded and believed all this he was saying, and yet he introduced the age of the Bushes, you know, and that was well known. I mean, Bush was locked in on the CIA and the whole thing. So if there's anything that we should be seeking, and all that we do and all your understanding, I think, and you do such a good job, and that is try to find the truth and tell the people what's going on. I think the people would make the right decision if they could just find the truth.
Well, here's another thing. You always say, if you want to find out what motivates people, just listen to them when they tell you. And here's a great clue with what's happening in Afghanistan. You know, the peace talks were supposed to happen starting in March between Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and the U.S. Well, the Taliban issued a statement before, and here's what they said. This is going to surprise you. Until the occupation of foreign troops ends, these talks will yield no results. So they've said it over and over. The occupation is what motivates them to continue attacking.
I think, for the most part, the real thugs, the really bad people, basically tell the truth. I imagine you could go back and find out that Hitler was probably telling the truth somewhere along the way and warning people about that. But bin Laden, you know, after 9/11, he came up and he said there were 3 reasons why we pushed this on. And one was the U.S. military troops in Saudi Arabia. The other thing was the constant bombing and killing of Arabs and Muslims in Iraq, and also the mistreatment of the Palestinians.
Yeah.
But for me to have suggested that, which I did, hysteria breaks out. We don't want to hear that, because that means that their idea of saying they hate us and we're the enemy of the Middle Easterners because we're rich and we're special, and you know, and they attack us for our freedoms, and of course that obviously is not true, and so this refusal to listen on occasion to some of these things where people are actually giving us pretty good hints.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the Taliban victory is inevitable. The question is how much more money and lives will be wasted until we realize reality.
But that's for sure, and that is sad, and I think if we recognize that, we at least might not have more suffering and the destruction of our society here, because it bankrupts us. All empires ends for financial reasons, and the most recent example was the downfall of the Soviet Empire, and it came for financial reasons. We didn't have to fight them. I don't think we will ever be defeated by outsiders coming in. We will be defeated internally here by stupid laws and stupid rules and stupid economic policies of endlessly being involved overseas and endorsing an economic policy of debts don't matter and printing money is good. And economic planning is the solution. Until we change that, we can expect a lot of trouble, and I think it's coming close, and this is going to wake up a lot of people, as it already has. But what we really need is an awakening to understanding why a principled position of individual liberty and free markets and property rights and minding our own business can solve so many of our problems. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.